Okay, we've had a few more join now. I think I'm going to get us started, but as mentioned, as you join our workshop, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. This will be an interactive workshop. It's covering the topic of sustainability for SMEs. So the goal today is simple. By the end, you should feel confident about why sustainability matters for your business and what your first steps could look like. So before we dive in, I want to thank our partners for helping make this workshop possible, particularly to the IFC and the government of Switzerland for providing financial support for this project and really making all of this content come together. Also, a really big thank you to the Ethical Supply Chain Program for joining us today to provide practical insight from their experience working with SMEs on this topic. We're also pleased to have Richin Sharing from UNDP, who will also support the Q&A and share resources available from UNDP in your market today. And of course, we would not be here today if it were not for our host. So, really big thank you to the Royal Securities Exchange of Bhutan and the CEO, Dorji Funcho, and Deshin, who's also here with us today for organizing this workshop, bringing you all together and sharing this opportunity with the whole market. Now, to get us kicked off, I'd love to pass over to our host today, and we're very pleased to have the CEO of the Royal Securities Exchange of Bhutan with us, Dorji Funcho. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I pass to you to kick off our workshop with opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. Uh, I'm sure our participants are joining right now. You can see only 36 of them. But anyways, it's indeed an honor and a profound privilege to open this session. I think this is for the first time the Royal Securities Exchange, in collaboration and support of the United Nations Sustainability Stock Exchange Initiative, IFC, and the partners, is convening this forum. This virtual gathering, in fact, holds a deep significance, particularly for Bhutanese financial landscape, because we stand at a very pivotal moment just now in modernizing our financial market, and I see it inextricably linked with the principles of long-term value, transparency, and sustainable development. When we speak of sustainability, I believe that Bhutan has a unique advantage. As Bhutanese, our nation has placed well-being of its people and its pristine environment at the very heart of the development. And in terms of global landscape as well, sustainability itself is gaining traction as well. And of course, often sustainability is treated as a new trend or a complex corporate compliance burden. However, for Bhutan, it's not a foreign concept. I think this is deeply rooted in our legacy, in terms of the core principles of our development philosophy also, and what we promise for our next generation is very evident uh, in our policies and bylaws. Again, we may feel that sustainability will be very daunting, will be very financially out of reach. But I guess thank you to UNSEE for this program, because I believe today's workshop is designed to change this perspective. I think we are here to explore how sustainable practices, from resource efficiency and waste reduction to ethical sourcing and community engagement, can actually serve as the greatest driver for our business resilience and long-term profitability. Personally, for me, I view sustainability as a new currency for investor trust, transparency, and market competitiveness. It's a mechanism by which we can translate our national policies into something tangible, something that's responsible in terms of achieving operational excellence. I would also like to take this moment to share that the stock exchange, in collaboration with UNDP and Biofin, will soon be launching the sustainability reporting framework for our listed companies and SOEs to begin with. And today's workshop I think it perfectly aligns with our initiative. And I sincerely hope that today's forum provides us some actionable insights, equipping us with tools and clarity needed to accelerate our collective journey towards a sustainable future. With this, I convey my sincere thanks to everyone for joining us here today and to UNSSE and their partners. We appreciate your dedication to the shared mission for sustainable future, and I wish you all a very productive and successful session. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And we saw a few applause there coming through. A big congratulations for the launch of that new report. We hope that this workshop is a perfect first step for your market to move forward in this topic. As a reminder, it is being recorded, so you can come back to this and continue the learnings if you need a refresher later on. I'm very pleased to have with us also another welcoming remarks from our partners at the IFC. Lopa Raman is an ESG officer, and she's here to share the IFC's perspective. Thank you so much. I know, Lopa, you're very busy, so thanks for taking some time to be with us for the opening comments today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for inviting me, and really huge congratulations to the Royal Securities and Exchange of Bhutan for taking this. I believe this is the first time that you're organizing this workshop on sustainability reporting. So as Tiffany introduced me, I manage ESG advisory programs for IFC for South Asia. And together in South Asia, we've organized several programs with our stock exchanges here, including the Colombo Stock Exchange, the Dhaka Stock Exchange, as well as the Chittagong Stock Exchange. And now we've also helped the regulators adopt IFRS S1 and S2 standards, which then provides the guidance and the standards for companies to use for their sustainability reporting. So for us, for South Asia, the objective and the aim is to really see companies improve on their disclosure standards, integrate ESG into their decision making, and then also integrating sustainability into the governance and strategies. It should not be looked at something in isolation, but really form the core and part of the decision making and strategy setting for the future. So really happy to see this first steps being taken. And because we have a lot of experience within IFC by working with stock exchanges, not only in South Asia, but also globally, and also then supporting companies to help with their disclosure journey. We remain here to be supporting, and if you should be needing any further guidance, help, please do reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help and support you in this. Thank you so much.
Great.
Back to you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Lopa, for being with us. And do everyone remember that IFC has a number of resources, both online and to help you throughout this journey. So we'll be sure to share a lot of the online resources that you can get into in this training. But also, if you need to reach out to Lopa or her team at any point, please just let us know. Great. So with that, those inspiring words from our two opening remarks, let's get started. So just to kick us off on a few housekeeping points. So please make use of the Q&A box for questions. We're going to answer those throughout. And as I've already mentioned, we have a colleague of ours from UNDP here. We also have another colleague from our team who I'll introduce shortly to answer your questions. So any question you have, please don't hesitate to type that in the Q&A. We ask you to put it in the Q&A because if you do put it in the chat, there's a lot of chatter happening. We're sharing a lot of links. We might lose that question. So it helps us to make sure we can answer all of them if you put them in the Q&A box. Now, just to overview what we're doing today, we have 2 hours together to go through this topic. It's a lot to do actually in 2 hours, so we only have a short break around the halfway point, a little bit past the halfway point actually. We'll have a 5-minute break so you can get up and do a quick stretch, maybe grab yourself a coffee. And throughout, we're going to have, that live Q&A going. So any question you have at any point, just type that in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer that for you. just as a note, you can also upvote other people's questions. So if someone's asked a question that you also would like to have answers, you can give a little upvote or a thumbs up to that. We do expect your participation today. This is an interactive workshop. Even though you're muted, there's various ways to interact with us, and we expect you to do so. The first way is through asking questions or to participate in the polls, the Zoom polls that pop up on your screen. And we also are using something called Mentimeter, which is going to be a question that we're going to be, or a question or activity that we're going to do with you. You can already join the Mentimeter if you want. We're going to pop that link in the chat for you, and you can start logging into that Mentimeter. And then as we get to the question, we'll share it on our screen and see what everybody answered for that question. Great. Now a quick, certificates. So to give you a reward for your participation today, we will give you a certificate. Now we'll share at the end of the workshop how you get that certificate, but we will require you to fill in a short feedback survey and quiz at the end, and we'll share that link again at the end of the workshop so that you can get your certificate. Now, a quick introduction to the facilitators here today. My name is Tiffany Grabski. I'm the SSE Academy head. I'm very pleased to be here with you today and to be joined by my colleague, Fiona Quinlan Wells, whose birthday was just this weekend. So join me in wishing Fiona happy birthday. And she is our SSE training officer. She leads all of our training programs. So thanks so much, Fiona, for being here with us today and joining me for this workshop. We're also happy to be here with our guest speaker today, Ethical Supply Chain Program, founded by ICTI. And we have Tim with us today, who's going to share what his real life experience is working with SMEs on this particular topic. And just to note to two more people that we don't have on our screen, but that are here behind the scenes. We have our colleague Corley LaRue, who's joining us today. She developed the model guidance we're going to be using as a resource today. So she's going to be here to answer any of your questions. And we also have, as I mentioned, Rinchin from UNDP, who will also be here. Yeah, you can see him. Maybe Rinchin, you want to give everyone a wave. He's here to answer some of your questions as well. So thanks to all our colleagues for being here with us today. Now, we have some goals to achieve today. So by the end of this 2-hour workshop, we hope that you understand why sustainability matters to your business. We got a little intro to that in our opening remarks, but let's look at your specific business today and try to tease out how that can be beneficial to you. We also hope you can see how it connects to your strategy and your long-term objectives, really the value in working on sustainability here. We also hope that we can help you identify those practical first steps to integrate sustainability into business practices. And finally, to help you to understand who may need information on this. Who will you communicate sustainability related information with, and how can you do that? Most importantly, this is not a training about perfection. This is about getting started and building over time. So we hope that we can help you to do those first few steps at least. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be referencing quite a bit the SSE model guidance on this topic that our colleague Corley managed. So this guidance is designed to be a really practical tool and flexible. It's written so that stock exchanges can guide their markets on this topic, but it has really practical first steps you can use and importantly also a checklist in it. So we're going to be referring to that throughout today's training. You can find it on our website, and also the link is in the chat. Now with that, I'm going to pass, we still have our learning journey today. So here's what we're planning to do today. We have the SSE model guidance, which has 4 chapters, and we're going to go through all 4 of those chapters today. They're prepare, align, implement, and communicate. So we will start with the why this matters for your business in particular, even if you're a small business. Then we'll dive into the how with a focus on strategy and governance. And then next we'll look practically at what can be done. And finally, we will discuss communication, where and with who to share information about your sustainability journey. And we'll also include interactive elements and a short 5-minute break halfway through. So with that, I'm going to move over to our Mentimeter. So some of you might have joined it already. If not, you can join it now using the link in the chat. Fiona's just going to share her screen. You can also use that QR code there to join our Mentimeter. And here we're just going to ask you a couple questions to get to know you, and it also helps you start to get to know how to use Mentimeter. So our first question is quite simple. How many employees does your company have? So you can choose 0 to 10, 10 to 250, 250 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, or more than 10,000. So far we have, one company on either end, and the majority of you kind of in the middle somewhere, the biggest one being 10 to 250. So we really do have some SMEs here. Now I've noticed we could get a few more of you on the call. We have nearly 70 of you on the workshop and only 26 of you in the Mentimeter. So if you're having trouble joining the Mentimeter at all, please just let us know in the chat so that we can help you join the Mentimeter. Now, maybe Fiona, we can go to the next. Perfect. Next question is to rate your comfort level before the workshop. So we're going to ask you this question again at the very end, but we want to know how comfortable are you with this topic now? So do you feel ready to integrate sustainability into your business practices? Would you feel ready to already use the guidance document that's coming out from the exchange? And we're going to give you a minute to fill that in because we'd like to get a sense of how comfortable you are all with this topic. Great. So we're around the 6 mark, 6 out of 10. So that's not too bad. We'll leave that Mentimeter running so you can continue to answer this question, but we'll move back to the slides so we can move on with our first module. But anyone who hasn't filled in that Mentimeter, please feel welcome to. You can use the link in the chat to go straight to it and answer that question about how comfortable you are. And with that, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Fiona, who's going to take us through the first module. Over to you, Fiona.
Great, thanks Tiffany, and hi everyone, great to join you here today. So we'll get started now with our first module of the training, which is prepare. So this is all around understanding what it is that's driving sustainability, and particularly why that's relevant to companies and smaller companies as well. So we're going to focus on a few key things in this section. So we're going to start firstly with the big picture and understanding what this is all around. We'll then move on to looking at your specific business context, and then we'll finish off by thinking about what your capacity to respond to those trends is, because we know, of course, that sustainability is going to really look different for every business. So to get started, I think it's very important, of course, for us to align firstly on what we mean by sustainability, and so really establishing a definition to work with for our training. So one of the most kind of commonly used definitions of sustainability was set out in the Brundtland Report, which was published by the UN in the late 1980s. And this referred to sustainability as being all around meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So all around balancing that contention, I guess, between what we need today to thrive and survive as a society and what future generations need as well. And I know, as Georgie already introduced us to, Bhutan in particular have a very leading approach to this in terms of your policy and how you govern your kind of nation as a whole. So we know that this statement can, however, feel quite ambitious and might even feel a little bit out of reach for small companies, because of course it is an aspirational goal that is there to help us formulate. But what we really need to do is try and think about this in a more practical way and apply this formula directly to our SMEs or really to any business. So if we start to take that definition down to the business level, what we want to think about here is how that we can meet those needs for a business and its clients today, but also allow it to keep functioning well into the future. And so this is often going to mean that you need to support communities and the environment so that the ecosystem that you operate in and which supports your business will ultimately continue to thrive. And so when we're talking about sustainability today for business, what we mean is businesses that pursue long-term success through responsible management practices. And this will also include managing responsibly the different environmental and social impacts, risks, and opportunities that the business faces. And it will also mean implementing good governance practices, which are overall going to ensure that the value of your company remains viable and competitive and relevant over the long term. And so for a small company, the focus then really needs to be on whether you think that your business's future needs are going to be met. Are you depending perhaps on a particular resource that is maybe scarce? That could mean your business's success is at risk in the future if, for example, that resource became difficult to get. Or maybe there's some risk of social kind of disruption that could affect your operating environment. So these are all important questions to think about as you're starting to think about how sustainable and ultimately resilient your business is for the long term. So with that in mind, let's have a little bit of a look at why sustainability matters for our businesses. And we'll start with that big picture that I mentioned. And this is really thinking about some of the big global shifts we're seeing. So we're seeing policy, science, technologies, and customer expectations that are all rapidly moving in the same direction towards putting greater accountability on businesses for their environmental and social impact. And then what that's starting to trigger is reactions from financial stakeholders, for example, investors, insurers, and also regulatory authorities, who are ultimately wanting to see better disclosures from companies, better data, and more transparency to show that they're really understanding and managing those big picture risks. And then, of course, because large companies are often the ones who are maybe the first to feel that pressure, they're starting to change their public reporting practices. And as a result, the type of information and due diligence that they want to do with the companies who are in their supply chain is also starting to change. And so what that's all really resulting in is a greater pressure on SMEs to take up action in response to these shifts. And I think a key message that we want to get across in our training today is that even if you're not the company that's directly feeling that pressure from policy, from regulation, it's very likely that the larger businesses that you work with may be already feeling that pressure. And ultimately, we're going to start to see that trickle down to you. So really being prepared for those trends as a smaller business or an organization earlier on in your sustainability journey is what's important here. And overall, what we're seeing here is that the same forces that are creating this pressure are also creating opportunities as well. Because those businesses who really respond to these trends are going to potentially open up new markets for themselves. For example, there could be markets that reward responsible suppliers. For example, there could also be public procurement practices that prioritize sustainability credentials. And there might even be clients who are particularly looking for partners who can demonstrate that they're managing these aspects responsibly. So really the key thing to show here is that that big picture isn't just about risk, but also it's about opportunity. And for those businesses that respond to this effectively, there's potentially going to be competitive advantages as well. So let's have a little bit of a look at some of the evidence that's documenting some of those global shifts that we just mentioned there. So the first of these I want to talk about comes from the policy and regulatory space. So this map comes from what we're calling the Carrots and Sticks report, which is shared in the chat by Tiffany there, which really assesses different sustainability and ESG, which is environment, social and governance policies that exist around the world. What we see on this map is that almost every country in the world now has at least some form of sustainability policy in place. And the darker colours show where there are more policies. So in particular, in Europe, in North America, and in parts of Asia and Latin America, we're seeing upwards of 30 or more policies in a single country that cover sustainability related topics. And now in Bhutan, we know that this database pulls out some of the things that you already have in place as well. For example, some of the green tax rules and regulations, as well as various different acts that exist governing environmental management practices across industries. So, for example, the Forest and Nature Conservation Act, the Waste Act, Biodiversity Act, and also the Labour and Employment Act. So clearly various issues there that are already subject to regulations as well. And another specific trend we're seeing is the move towards more policies on sustainability disclosure, in particular on the global scale. So you might have heard of an organization called the IFRS, or the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. And this is the body that produces financial reporting standards, which are already used in over 140 countries around the world. But in recent years, IFRS has set up a new body called the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is also setting similar standards in relation to sustainability reporting. And these standards, which are called IFRS S1 and S2, are asking companies to collect data on their sustainability related risks and opportunities. And this could include things like reporting on the carbon emissions that come from their value chain, and that would include, of course, their supply chain and their suppliers. And so if we're looking on this slide, we can already see that around 40 countries or jurisdictions globally have either already introduced the standards or are planning to make use of them in their regulatory frameworks. And what's important to see here as well is that these jurisdictions represent a very large share of the global economy and global greenhouse gas emissions. So really what's clear here is that this isn't a small niche trend, but it's becoming a normal and accepted part of how business is done globally. So you might be thinking, well, maybe in our jurisdiction, these standards haven't become mandatory yet, or maybe because I'm not a listed company, this might not apply to me. And indeed, it could be the case that you're never actually directly required to report under these standards. But a really key point here is that it may well be that your customers, your investors, or your partners are required to report using these standards. And of course, when large companies are required to report, we're then going to see that those demands feed through to the requests and expectations of the value chain for those companies, including the SMEs that sit within that. And another couple of quick points to mention here as well that are driving demand for this includes the sort of the space that we're seeing for more investor, insurance, and regulatory focused data. So this is having an effect not only on how companies disclose information, which we're going to dive into in our communicate part of this training program, but it can also shape the actions that companies are taking and what ultimately they prioritize in terms of their sustainability related strategies. So let's have a little bit of a look at some initiatives that are relevant to mention here. So on the left-hand side, we see sustainability disclosure standards. And so we already heard about the IFRS Foundation's global standards, which I mentioned already. But there's a number of standards as well that might exist in different markets and be prioritized by different stakeholders. And these are what really could lead to data requests for you as a smaller business as well. So it's helpful to understand that these are the standards that larger organizations may be using and which could be driving their disclosure requirements from you. And so what could be helpful to do here is to have a look at these standards because they could help you to structure the types of information that you prepare so that you have that information ready to report to your value chain. And so I've mentioned ISSB already, the IFRS standards, but alongside that, we also have the GRI standards or Global Reporting Initiative and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards or ESRS. And what's important to say is that all of these different disclosure standards are really placing an emphasis on companies assessing and disclosing practices within its value chain. And again, as I've mentioned already, we can expect then that larger companies are going to increasingly be looking for data on environmental and social issues from their suppliers. And so alongside those disclosure standards that I mentioned, there are also a number of different organizations or platforms that are seeking to evaluate supply chain partners on their sustainability performance and the different data that they provide. And so, for example, we have the Ethical Supply Chain Programme, who of course have joined us today. We also have other initiatives such as SEDEX, EcoVadis, who are all looking to provide services to help enhance transparency around sustainability with a focus on supply chains. And then finally, we also have CDP, or the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a global disclosure platform that has a particular supply chain focused questionnaire, which is already requiring 45,000 suppliers to disclose information. And in particular, 11,000 SMEs are using that questionnaire as well. So really, it's already clear that there are a lot of different requirements here that can affect you as an organization. So as much as you can, getting prepared for responding to those is going to leave you best placed to benefit from some of the opportunities that exist here and managing those risks. Okay, so just to round off this section, we've got a quick quiz question which we just launched for you now. And so the question here is just to reflect on what is your sustainability objective. So we've already heard a little bit about some of the different drivers that could exist for companies in this place, but it might be useful just to reflect on, for your organization or for you as a participant today, what's your key focus here? And you can select more than one option here if more than one of these apply. But useful just to think about what it is in particular that you're focusing on sustainability for. Maybe it's because there are some requirements already. For example, you want to achieve a particular sustainability certification. Maybe you want to participate in a rating, an investor ESG or environment social governance rating. Maybe you're already looking to report this information to your stakeholders or in a sustainability report. Or maybe you're just looking to improve your internal capacity. Okay, let's have a little bit of a look at your responses now. Just in the interests of time, I'll close the poll. So it looks like for lots of you that really that building internal capacity is the key starting point here, and that you're looking to get your own understanding together. But a number of you already perhaps looking to do a number of the other activities as well. So that's great to see that we've got a number of different kind of perspectives on this topic here today. But indeed, one of the most important first steps, of course, is to build that internal capacity. So great to have you all here with us to do that in our session. Okay, fantastic. So that brings us to the end of our segment there. And I'm going to pass over now to Tiffany for our next part, looking at how to apply these big picture trends to your own businesses.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona, for providing that really good big picture. I think before we move forward, though, we have to recognize that SMEs do face certain challenges and opportunities that larger companies with large sustainability teams might not face. So that's why our guidance today really focuses on practical and proportionate steps. Now, I'll leave this slide with you to look at the challenges and opportunities facing particularly smaller companies. But let's look at what I mean by practical, proportionate steps. I think this is really important to overview here, and that's the principle of proportionality. Now, proportionality means that what you do should be appropriate to your size, your resources, your level of impact. You're not expected to do everything at once. The goal is to take manageable steps using what you already have. Now, a few common practices that apply proportionality are listed on this slide. For example, you could stagger implementation, starting small and building over time. A business might begin, for example, with scope 1 emissions or scope 2 emissions, whichever make more sense for them, and then work towards scope 3 if it's a little bit more complicated for them. Now, we'll discuss scopes of emissions right away, but just to say that it doesn't mean we have to do everything at once, but the steps you take should make sense for your business. And that's why proportionality can sometimes seem a little bit confusing, is because there's no kind of one size fits all. We all have to do it in the way that makes the most sense. So let's practice. Let's go through a couple examples and see if that makes it a little bit more clear. So throughout the workshop, we're going to be using these two fictitious companies. The objective is to bring the concepts that we're talking about to life. So these two companies face the same world, the same pressures, the same opportunities, but they're different enough that their responses to these pressures and their decisions related to sustainability may look different, and justifiably so. So first, we have the company that we've called Green Stitch Garments. Again, fictitious company. Let's say it has 80 employees. It's family owned, and it has one factory and 3 delivery vans. They make uniforms for local businesses, and recently they've started to also supply via the public sector procurement bids. Nobody on their team has sustainability as a title in their job title, but they have never, and they've never reported on sustainability. So this is really new to Green Stitch Garments. Now, our second company, another fictitious company we've made up, is called Logiflow Solutions. This company has 250 employees, a little bit bigger. It's privately held with investors involved in the business, and they manage freight across 3 countries with a fleet of 40 vehicles. They're already subject to some sustainability reporting requirements in one of the countries that they work in, and their operations manager has recently taken on the title of sustainability manager as well. So they have, dual roles. So now let's suppose that both of these companies have been asked by a client to provide greenhouse gas emissions, or what you might hear as GHG emissions. So let's look at how each of them could have responded. Now, first, I think it's important to cover what are GHG emissions. Some of you might be very familiar with this, but some of you might not be familiar at all. So think of your company as sitting in the middle of this diagram, that dark blue arrow there. And then emission sources can radiate in both directions. So scope 1 is what you directly control. So the fuel combusted in Green Stitch's 3 delivery vans or Logiflow's fleet of 40 vehicles. These emissions happen because of assets those companies own and operate themselves. So they directly control the emissions. If they were to stop operating, those emissions would also stop. That's scope 1. Scope 2 is one step out. It's the energy purchased, usually mostly electricity. And that's, for example, the power running Green Stitch's production facilities that comes from the grid. And generating that electricity produced emissions at some point, even if it's not on their premises. So that's scope 2. Now, scope 3 is everything further out. So both upstream, meaning your supply chain, and downstream, meaning what happens after you've delivered. So for Green Stitch, that could be the fabric sourced from textile suppliers and the emissions related to producing that. For Logiflow, it might include the eventual disposal of the goods that their vehicles have transported. So the diagram here shows the full spectrum. The reporting company sits in the center with upstream activities flowing in from the left and downstream flowing out to the right. So that just so we're all on the same page of what scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are. So now let's look at Green Stitch first and see how they might have reacted to a question from their client. So in this situation, Green Stitch Garments has a client that's asked them for the emissions associated with the uniforms they supply as part of a procurement survey. Let's go through what they could have done. Now, they could have gotten started with data they already have. So electricity bills and fuel logs, they're a great first step. With that, they can already start calculating their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Remember that fuel logs can help them calculate their scope 1 emissions, which include the burning of fuel in their own delivery vans. For the electricity bills, this can help them to determine emissions associated with powering their own buildings, which is scope 2. So to calculate emissions from the fuel logs and electricity bills, they might have used a free tool online. For example, here we say they use a free government calculator that helps to calculate estimated emissions using data they have. A quick Google search can also find you a number of other free calculators available. This, of course, helps you estimate the total emissions. Then they further review their emissions profile, and they also made an estimation of where the largest proportion of their emissions would be categorized. And this helps them to determine actually that scope 3 is the most relevant for this category of emissions if they were to assess their own exposure or risk related to emissions in the climate. So for Green Stitch, the greatest source of emissions is estimated to be from the raw materials, such as the cotton and the synthetic fabric that they buy in order to make their garments. Because of this, they asked their main supplier that supplies 90% of their fabrics if they could share the emissions associated with the fabrics they are purchasing. And the supplier, unfortunately, said they do not have that information. So given their current expertise and resources, they determined that it would not be feasible for them to determine the estimation of the scope 3 in the timelines that they need to respond to this questionnaire. But they didn't just leave it there. So what they decided to do is to explain in their summary report, alongside their scope 1, 2 emissions for the client, that they tried to get this information, that they were unable to achieve it from their supplier. But they also explained that they're planning to assess whether they can work with their main supplier to calculate these emissions or possibly find another supplier that can provide this information. So based on the information they had, Green Stitch Garments now has identified a possible risk that a particular supplier they're working poses to them. So if more clients start asking Green Stitch Garments for this information and they can't get this information from their supplier, then they actually risk losing contracts that they could otherwise get, specifically since they're looking to work with the government now, and it's possible that the government will be asking for this information. So they start discussing this from a risk perspective and put into some plans how they can mitigate this risk. Let's look now, on the contrary, at Logiflow Solutions and how they might tackle this same idea. So Logiflow Solutions has a client asking them, what are the emissions related to the transportation of a particular product? So for example, they want to know whether they should go with Logiflow or another transportation company, and they need to know the emissions related to that transportation. So how might have they started? Well, Logiflow Solutions has a little bit more complexity here. They have 250 employees. They have a fleet of 40 vehicles operating across 3 different countries. And they do have a manager who is already kind of working on sustainability. So they're a little bit further along. They probably begin with scope 2, pulling their electricity bills. Quick to do so, quick win. Then they screened their scope 3 sources, staff travel, office purchases, waste, etc., and made a considered judgment that these were not material enough to measure fully at this stage. This is proportionality in action. So in our first example, scope 3 was the focus because it was actually the most relevant to the company from a risk perspective. It made sense for them to take the time and measure their scope 3. For this company, it's less relevant, it's not as risky, it's not as relevant to the company operating, so they decide to use their resources elsewhere where it makes a little bit more sense. And where they invested real effort then was scope 1, their vehicle fleet. So something important to remember is that a fleet of 40 vehicles is rarely 40 identical vehicles, right? So they have different ages, they have different makes, different fuel types, and each has a different emissions profile. So rather than applying a single average emissions factor across the whole fleet, maybe using a government calculator or a free online calculator that really makes it the same for all vehicles, they're actually looking vehicle by vehicle to determine the exact efficiency data for each vehicle. Now, through doing that, what they find is that some vehicles are consuming significantly more fuel and therefore emitting far more than others. And when they cross-reference this with running costs, those same high-emitting vehicles, of course, are more expensive to operate. So what started as an emissions exercise for Logiflow quickly became a cost savings conversation. And they could now point to specific vehicles in the fleet that were dragging up their carbon footprint and also up their operating costs. And they make a business case then for replacing those vehicles. So their output to this client survey was a 2-page structured disclosure published online with a brief narrative on climate-related cost risks and their plan for reducing their fleet's emissions over the next 5 years. So if you compare that to Green Stitch, both respond proportionately to their own size and complexity. And for both, this is just the start. Actually, the first disclosure is rarely the end of the journey. It just creates that baseline. And as Logiflow just demonstrated, sometimes the process of measuring your emission surfaces business insights you wouldn't have found any other way. So that's proportionality. It's not a lower bar. It's just making sure we're approaching it appropriately for your particular business. Great. So keeping proportionality in mind for the rest of today's training, let's do a quick review of this unit before we go to module 2. So to summarize our first module, preparing for sustainability means 3 key things. First, understand the big picture, what's changing globally. Second, understand your business context, what matters for you. And understand your capacity to respond, proportionality, what is realistic. So these steps help you build a foundation before moving on. And with that, I'm going to pass to Fiona to take us into module 2. Thanks, Fiona.
Great, thanks so much for that, Tiffany. So moving in now to our next module, we're thinking about alignment. So this is really around setting your organization up for success by integrating sustainability, particularly into your governance and your strategy. So in other words, really making sustainability a part of how your business is run. So in this module, we're going to focus in particular on those two key areas and start with objectives. So that's really around how we think about strategy and embedding sustainability into your strategy. We'll then go on to looking at oversight. So that's the governance side of things and thinking about how decisions about sustainability can be governed and monitored in your business and how you can get yourself set up for success on that front. Okay, so we'll kick off this section with another quiz question now. And so our question at this point is, should your company's strategy consider the future impacts of drought and drying up of water? So this is, one topic that you may encounter within your geography, within your operations. And so the question is a simple one to start with. Do you think that's something that your organization's strategy should consider? And this could be for basically where you operate directly, or it could be where you source materials from as well. So you've got three options here. You can just select one. It's either yes, you definitely think you should consider those things. No, you don't think you need to, or maybe you think it depends actually. And let's give you a second or more to have a response on that before we talk about what the right answer could be here. Okay. It's always good to have as many of us taking part in the polls and in the Mentees as possible. So don't worry about getting things wrong as well, because obviously that's part of how we learn, I would say. So feel free to just take a guess if you're not sure what the right answer is here. Okay, let's end the poll there and I'll share the results with you. So it looks like most of us would have said yes here. A few people have gone with depends, but no one thinks a straight answer would no. So I think it's a case of most people would say yes, and some people think it depends. Well, I think that's a very fair position to end up in because I think it definitely does depend. But for many organizations, ultimately the answer will be yes. So, for example, if you were looking at this on behalf of Green Stitch Garments, let's say that they make their uniforms predominantly from cotton fabrics, and we know that cotton is one of the most water-intensive crops in the world. And so, of course, if they're sourcing their cotton from fabric suppliers who are growing cotton in regions that are experiencing drought or water scarcity, then they could start to see disruptions in the supply of the materials to their business. Maybe they would see price spikes if the availability of water to produce cotton limited supply. And so then water risk really is a strategic issue for their organization because even if they're not using it in their own operations, it's clearly a very important input to the materials they use. But if we think about Logiflow Solutions, that's the business who are running the fleet operations on land. So it might be that their direct exposure to water scarcity would be quite a bit lower because, of course, drought doesn't necessarily stop a truck from running. So it might be for Logiflow that this particular risk sits further down their priority list. And although it's something they might want to keep a watch on, it might not be something that's so strategic for them that they need to integrate it in that way. And so what's really important to remember here is when we're taking a particular issue like this, it's all about contextualizing it to your own operations, thinking about whether it could be a risk or an opportunity for your organization, and how ultimately you can start to embed that in the way that you operate. So to help us with asking the right questions to think about these issues, we've included a slide in the handout presentation here, which shares with you a number of questions that you can ask yourself to think about this issue. So just as a reminder as well, I think we've shared the link in the chat, but we'll reshare it again a few times in the session. You can find the slide presentation, including some extra slide materials on these topics, available to download from the web page from today's session. But in the interest of time, let's move directly into our next activity to really start to practice integrating sustainability into strategy. So for this activity, we're going to use our two companies again, Logiflow and GreenStitch, to really start thinking about what it means to integrate sustainability into strategy. And so this diagram shows us a simple, practical cycle for integrating sustainability, which we're going to work through together for Logiflow to start with. So at the top, you could start by reviewing your vision and mission. So really thinking about you have what your vision is and do you have sustainability embedded into that? Then you would want to start thinking about how to scan the external landscape. So what are the particular risks and opportunities you think your organization could face relating to sustainability? That brings you on to then focusing and zoning in on really what are the most relevant issues for your business, which are the highest priority ones to think about. And then finally, you want to think about how you can embed those particular issues into your strategy and plans. So, of course, we've shown this as a loop here, and that really shows this as a continuous cycle. That landscape around your organization is likely to keep evolving. So, this is something you may want to repeat a number of times. But let's walk through it together for GreenStitch. So we're going to go back to Menti again now, and thanks Tiffany for resharing the link already. So I see quite a few of you have now joined the Menti, so that's great. So do please take part in these questions now. I think it's great to get your ideas and just get us all thinking practically about these steps together as well. As I've said, there's no wrong answers here. This is really just a test environment to help us get familiar with the concepts. But if we're thinking now about how to walk through this process, so as we said, the first step is to think about the vision and mission of the organization. And so for Logiflow, you can see here on the screen that their vision is to become the go-to solution for getting products from point A to point B. So this mission really suggests that their aim is all around being a reliable, efficient, and cost-effective partner connecting the whole supply chain. And so this kind of premise is really built all around efficiency and cost. So that's, of course, completely understandable for a logistics business, which is going to be operating perhaps with quite tight margins across multiple markets. But this potentially raises some questions for them strategically, because as clients are potentially starting to ask them about emissions, and maybe investors are wanting to understand how they're managing risks, and maybe regulations are tightening as well. Does this mission that's built purely around efficiency and cost still position the business well for the future? That's something that Logiflow might not be able to answer right now, but as they continue this cycle or this review process, they could consider making some adjustments here to better emphasize sustainability. And so this is exactly this matters. So we don't necessarily want to rewrite the mission and vision overnight, but we want to ask ourselves honestly, does it stand and still reflect where the world is going? So let's get into the exercise then. So the second step here will be, after they've set up that vision and mission, to think about scanning the external landscape for particular risks and opportunities relating to sustainability. So there's a number of external tools you might be able to use to help you with this exercise. But let's just do an initial brainstorm now for Logiflow to think about these issues. So maybe based on what you've heard about them so far, as a reminder, they're a transport and logistics business. Are there any particular sustainability risks or opportunities that come to mind for you? So feel free to just share a couple of words if you've got any ideas about something that could be a risk or an opportunity for them. So we've mentioned already that they're not a real company, but we're saying that they have a fleet of 40 vehicles across 3 different countries. We've seen that they're already facing some regulatory requirements relating to sustainability reporting in some of their markets as well. Okay, so I see a few responses coming in already. Someone is mentioning fuel costs and supply continuity. Indeed, I think that's a great point to highlight. Of course, for a logistics company where fuel is going to be one of their largest cost lines, the price instability of fuel is increasingly going to be something that they are exposed to. And if they are still relying predominantly or entirely on fossil fuel combustion vehicles, they've got no real buffer then when prices spike, as we're probably seeing happen for them at the moment, for example. We've seen emissions and air pollution coming up as well there. So I think, again, this is great to highlight. So Of course, the single biggest direct environmental impact that they'll have are the emissions that are associated with their vehicles, because, as we've already said, they have fossil fuel combustion engines. So, if there are going to be more regulations limiting emissions from vehicles, maybe relating to carbon or also air quality emissions, they could be very exposed to those regulatory changes, and that could create quite a large cost for them to comply with those regulations. For example, if they have to change out their vehicles. And also if it's something that their clients start to put pressure on them for as well. Maybe their clients want to see them using cleaner fuels in their vehicles. Let's see. Thanks everyone. We've got lots of great answers here. What else are we seeing? So competition from other vehicle types. So yeah, maybe they're actually starting to get behind if there are other organizations who've been more responsive to these changes and switched to electric vehicles already. So conversely, someone's mentioned here, of course, that could be an opportunity for them as well. Exactly. I see lots of good responses here, echoing the answers on fuel costs, emissions. Maybe they're going to see cost benefits someone's mentioned as well. So actually, there's an opportunity, of course, if they switch to electric vehicles to potentially significantly reduce their fuel costs as well in the long term. What else are we seeing? So I think this fuel piece is coming up quite a lot. Regulations again, maybe disposal and recycle of vehicle parts. Interesting. So maybe the end of use of the vehicles too. Someone's mentioning the geopolitical risks, which ultimately affect import-driven economy. So yeah, maybe the overall volume of logistics trade could go down as a result of that as well. So lots of really good ideas. A few additional ones. I think I saw someone mentioned labor standards as well, but actually that's something that increasingly is a growing kind of area for many organizations to see the different labor standards and road safety standards could be relevant. We might also see the risks of extreme weather starting to impact them more significantly if increasing extreme weather events could lead to disruptions in road networks or increasing damage to their vehicles too. And then on the opportunity side, I think a lot of the opportunity here probably is counter to what the risks are. So indeed, as you said, if they electrify their fleet, if they focus on kind of switching to biofuels, etc., they could see both customer benefits in terms of supply chain relations, but also quite significant cost efficiency as well. So lots of great suggestions there. Okay, so let's move to the next question now. Oh, excuse me. Let's click again. Sorry, the wrong button came up. There we go. So we've pulled through into our next question a couple of the key risks and opportunities we think would be most relevant for Logiflow. And I think all of these came up in your answers, so well done, everyone. And this list of issues, what we'd like to do now is to think about how do we rate the significance or how do we prioritize these risks and opportunities? So you can have a go here with each of these issues of assessing using the scale how likely you think that risk or opportunity would be to realized or to occur, and how significant do you think that risk or opportunity would be for the organization. And that significance could be in terms of maybe the costs or the restrictions or benefits it could bring to their business. So this is exactly the exercise that we would then want to do in the next stage of our process as we're developing our strategy. So appraising those different risks and opportunities and thinking about which of them we expect to be the highest ones to prioritize for us. So far, thanks everyone who's voted. It looks like we see the likelihood of the fuel efficiency opportunity being the highest, and maybe air quality risks being the lower likelihood issue. But ultimately, I think we're seeing all of these issues somewhere in that top right-hand box of the quadrant, so relatively high significance and high likelihood. So it may be that it makes sense for Logiflow to then focus on developing an approach to managing all of these issues. But I think based on your answers, it looks like we're seeing the risk of greenhouse gas emissions and also the opportunity for fuel efficiency, which obviously are quite closely connected issues, as maybe being the highest priority ones. And so what we would then want to do is really think about how we feed those particular issues into our strategy. We might go back to that vision and mission statement and think about, if we've talked about already the importance of efficiency for the business, how environmental efficiency and emissions efficiency could be brought out more strongly in that. So these are really what we want to kind of work through for our own organizations, is conducting that assessment. Okay, so going into the final part now, we just like to reflect quickly on maybe an action that we think that Logiflow could take to better ensure that these issues are embedded in its strategy. So we've talked there about the priority issues, maybe fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions regulations or reporting requirements. What do you think is an action or a takeaway that Logiflow could take to better respond to these issues, to embed it into its strategy? So feel free to just share a couple of words here. Again, no right or wrong answers necessarily. Great, thanks those who've responded. So I see someone's already mentioning updating the fleet purchasing policy, maybe looking at a roadmap towards moving to electric vehicles, conducting maybe a more thorough risk assessment. Great, lots of really good responses here. Thanks, everyone. Calculating its emissions, so yeah, maybe just getting a better understanding, firstly, on what those emissions are. Shifting to EVs coming up a number of times, and having stronger future plans. Exactly. So this is all what we're aiming to do here, is to strengthen our future resilience by making sure we're thinking about these issues now and having good conversations. Great. Thanks, everyone. I think that's really helped to highlight, hopefully, what those steps are and how that could work for Logiflow. So I think we've already raised lots of good ideas here. I think one thing just to reflect on as we finish this exercise is we heard about Logiflow's mission being really around efficiency and cost. But what we've really mapped out here is that actually they're missing a few strategic levers here that are quite important factors in the long term for efficiency and cost in terms of fuel sources, electrification, etc. So one of the key takeaways from this conversation for Logiflow could be about how they evolve that mission. So this isn't just a rebrand, but an honest question for themselves about, do they really stand for and reflect the right kind of values about where the world is going and what's going to keep them resilient for the long term? Okay, thanks for responding to that exercise, everyone. I think that's been useful to walk through together. So I'm going to pass you back to Tiffany now so we can also take a look at the same thing for Green Stitch.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona. Always good to practice these things all together. Let's run through quickly what we could have seen for Green Stitch. I'll just move us perfect to, there we go. Oh, no. Do we have the, there we go. That's what I wanted. The same process. So we just went through this process with Logiflow. Let's go through it now with Green Stitch. So as a reminder, it starts with reviewing the vision and mission, then taking an external scan to identify risks and opportunities, then honing in your focus on the relevant aspects, and finally, then integrating that into your strategy through strategic actions that avoid separating sustainability out and separate silos. So remember, the objective is integration, not segregation. So we're just going to go through these on a high level, but to start with, I think it's important to understand Green Stitch's vision and mission. So their vision is to become the leading supplier of high quality uniforms in the country, and their mission is to be seen as a reliable, responsible, and quality partner that makes our country's professional industry look and feel great in their workplace. So we get a sense that this company already wants to be seen as high quality. They already have the word responsible in their mission. So I think sustainability is something that will fit very clearly in what they're doing. And maybe they have to be careful of, if they're making this promise of a responsible and quality partner, they need to make sure they back that up with their actions. Great. So let's go into step 2, scanning the external environment. Now, you remember when doing this with Logiflow that we mentioned there was a number of free resources and tools that can help you to get started. So let's just take a look here at some of examples of where Green Stitch garments could have started. So the first one here we suggest is that Green Stitch garments might have started with the SASB Standards Materiality Finder. Now, this covers 77 industries and identifies sustainability risks and opportunities likely to affect financial performance in that particular industry. So let's say Green Stitch started there. Then maybe they might have wanted to consider how their operations can have an external impact, and maybe they'll use GRI sector standards for that. Unfortunately, the textile and apparel standard is still under development, but it's coming out soon. So maybe they would keep that on their radar for future assessment and use their other standards for the time being. Additionally, they could make use of the VSME guidance from FREG. A lot of acronyms here, but don't worry, we're going to go through these in the communications section of our training. The VSME doesn't break it down by sector, but it does provide a very extensive list of possible sustainability issues, so they could go even deeper using this if they wish. Now, as we work through this one together, we're going to focus on one of those resources, which is the SASB Materiality Finder. Now you can access that. We'll share the link in the chat so you can make a use of it. Those who are not familiar with SASB, it's a Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and it's now part of the IFRS Foundation. And the SASB standards are industry specific, and for each industry it covers, it identifies the main financially relevant issues. So the apparel, accessories, and footwear industry identifies in particular product quality and safety, supply chain management, and materials sourcing and efficiency as areas that are particularly relevant to that sector. Now, in addition, we've noticed before in working with Green Stitch that they've already identified GHG emissions, particularly scope 3, as being relevant due to the client procurement survey asking them about this. As well as physical impacts of climate change, because they happen to have a factory located in an area that's increasingly being hit by hurricanes and floods. So that's another thing that would be particularly relevant to this particular company. So this might be what their mapping looks like, is a few areas that they've identified as being particularly relevant. Now, they could have then also opened up SASB's industry standard, which gives more detail on each of the topics that's listed. So take supply chain management as example. It flags labor conditions as relevant issues, which for Green Stitch means thinking about whether the farmers supplying their cotton are operating to acceptable labor standards. Now, that might not have been something they were thinking about before, but they can add that into the conversations they're already having with suppliers to mitigate that risk. Great. So scanning the landscape using SASB as a starting point and their own understanding and conversations that I've already been having might have led to a risk and opportunity list, something like this. It includes things like chemical and water use regulation, given they know that water is very important for cotton production, and also that certain chemicals are needed to process and dye fabrics. They also realize that child and forced labor is important by looking through the SASB standard and seeing that. And while discussing risks, they identified some opportunities on the flip side, such as being able to qualify for green procurement or responsible procurement programs, or even saving costs through efficient use of materials. So this list provides a good sense of where they should keep a watch on, but as a small company, it isn't necessarily possible for them to act on all of these items. So the next step is determining where they should focus. Now you'll see a matrix, much like we saw in the activity before. So Green Stitch evaluated each risk and opportunity to determine what the likelihood is of a risk or feasibility of an opportunity, and if it happens, how significant that impact would be for their business. So as you can see here, they have 4 that were in that top quadrant. These are high likelihood, high feasibility, and high impact. So that's where Green Stitch will focus on supply chain emissions and child forced labor as risks, and then on product certification and green procurement as opportunities. So that brings us to the last step then, and that's integrating it into their strategy. So this is where the work becomes concrete. So for Green Stitch, focusing on those top right priorities leads to 3 strategic actions. The first one, they can make sustainable production the foundation of how Green Stitch competes. So by committing to using sustainable materials and improving the efficiency of resource use, including energy and water, this isn't a new sustainability strategy sitting alongside its business. It actually becomes part of how Green Stitch defines quality and responsibility, which is already in their mission. So it's just making sure they're really sticking to that mission they've already set out. The second strategic action we see here is to integrate sustainability considerations into their procurement policy. So that means making sustainable sourcing a standard part of how they buy. Again, aligning back to that mission that they'd already set out. Now, finally, strategic action 3 involves taking a closer look at green procurement programs available and ensuring that the actions they are promising to meet will actually meet those requirements of those programs. So then, of course, with these actions, a green stitch can start again that circle we were talking about and make sure that they still agree with their mission and vision, that everything aligns, that their long-term vision still holds. And now that they have taken into consideration the risk and opportunities that are expected in the near and distant future, and that starts the process of sustainability integration. So having worked through that, now that we understand strategy, we can't really close out this unit without discussing the governance of that strategy, the oversight of making sure that that integration actually happens. So this diagram I think is really useful. It's from the ISO 37000, the International Standard on Governance of Organizations. So that's not a sustainability standard, it's about governance. And what I want you to notice that at the very center of this model sits the word purpose. This is what ISO refers to as the primary governance principle. And everything else, the strategy, the oversight, the accountability, the value generation, radiates outward from that purpose. Now, governance, in other words, is about making sure business stays true to what it exists to do. What is its purpose? So there is then enabling principles such as stakeholder engagement and social responsibility and risk governance that make it possible to achieve these principles. And on the very outside of the circle, we have 3 governance outcomes: so responsible stewardship, effective performance, and ethical behavior. But I show this to keep in mind that the objective of governance is making sure we have that alignment, kind of pulling us back to that vision and the mission. What is our purpose as an organization? And making sure we're keeping that alignment. Now, good governance isn't just about, compliance and oversight. It's actually one of the most practical tools a business has for growing sustainably long-term and building trust. So this slide shows 4 ways governance creates real business value. So for companies considering a future listing or accessing public markets, governance is the gateway. Exchanges and regulators expect good governance, and building it early makes it that transition a lot smoother. For investor due diligence, ESG oversight is increasingly a key criterion. And for those not familiar with ESG, it's environmental, social, and governance is the G. So investors want to know that someone is watching the sustainability risks, not just managing the day-to-day. So for credibility and partnerships, governance builds trust. And clients, partners, and suppliers want to work with a business that can demonstrate they make decisions responsibly and consistently. And for family businesses specifically, governance helps manage the tensions that naturally arise around succession, around ownership, and decision-making. Having very clear structures in place before those conversations become urgent is far better than the alternative. So good governance, in other words, is an investment in the long-term health of an organization. But what happens when there is no board? We often think of governance as being a governing board. But for many SMEs, particularly family-owned or founder-led businesses, the shareholder, the board, and the management can often actually be the exact same person. And that can create some specific governance challenges that I think are really important to explore in this module. So without a board, decisions rarely get systematically tested before they're being acted on, which can increase the risk of bias or even blind spots. And when you're also managing the day-to-day operations, it's really hard to kind of lift your head out of that and think long-term. This means that urgent issues are often going to beat those that may ultimately be more important over the long term. So the trade-offs that would be explicitly debated in a large business, such as dividends versus reinvestment or family needs versus a business's needs, are likely to instead get resolved quietly without anyone realizing a decision was even made, maybe one person just quickly making that decision. And risk management tends to be then reactive, drawing on a lot of gut instinct rather than structured decisions. Additionally, there can be a risk of what we call key person dependency, meaning the business's continuity is tied to one person's judgments, often with no succession plan, and this can lead to a reduced external credibility. So as investors and lenders are increasingly aware of these dynamics and may see the business as a higher risk without independent oversight, we need to make sure we're getting on top of how we govern our decisions. None of this is a criticism, but it's a reality for most owner-managed businesses. If you'd like guidance on implementing effective governance without a formal board, we've included some practical slides in the handout. In particular, you can make use of the IFC's guide on SME governance. This guidance, which you also can find the link for in the chat, thanks Fiona, is a free practical resource developed specifically for smaller businesses, recognizing that most corporate governance guidance is written for large companies. So this one is making sure that smaller companies also have that guidance. Now, I think it's time for a break, but let's take 2 seconds to just recap what we learned in this module. So to summarize the align module, aligning sustainability means 2 key things: integrating it into your strategy, focusing on your objectives, and ensuring you have the right structures and oversight in place. And this creates the foundation for effective implementation, which we'll discuss in our next module. So let's take a quick 5-minute break. Please go grab a quick stretch, do a walk around, grab a coffee, a tea, but come back in 5 minutes when the music ends and we'll dive into module 3. Thanks, everyone. the end of our 5-minute break. So hopefully everybody had a chance to grab a quick beverage, maybe do a quick stretch. But let's dive straight back in. And we're going to start our next module, which is on implement. This is where we move from strategy and understanding what to focus on into practical actions on those focus areas. And I'm pleased to have with us today a guest to share what that implementation really looks like in practice. Now, before we dive into the guest presentation, I just want to flag that in our guidance, there are 4 key steps for implementation. First, identify the most important issues through risk management practices. We've already started working on that. Then develop a plan. Next, you have to identify who is responsible and then implement those actions. Again, this isn't about doing everything, but really focusing on those action areas that make sense to you. Now, I'm so pleased we're invited today with Tim from the Ethical Supply Chain Program. Thanks, Tim, for being with us here today. And I pass to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And hello, everyone. I am very delighted to join today's training session. So let me start quickly by introducing myself again. My name is Tim Ziegler, and I manage the Social Impact Assessment Program here at the Ethical Supply Chain Program, or ESCP in short. So just a quick background, ESCP is a not-for-profit organization that has been operating for more than 20 years on a global scale. We work with companies of all sizes, but a large percentage of them are SMEs. We help them to understand, manage, and improve sustainability performance across several different operations and supply chains. So my goal for the next 10 minutes or so is a simple one. I hope to demystify what sustainability means in practice, to show that many of you, or the companies that you're engaging with, are actually already on this journey and possibly performing a lot better than you may think. And most importantly, I want to share practical and achievable steps which SMEs can take right away to start make progress on their sustainability journey. And I believe there's also a resource available which you can download later on. Right, just going to the next slide. So as others have said today, companies are increasingly expected to understand and manage ESG risks across their supply chain. It's not just a nice to have anymore, it's becoming a customer expectation, a regulatory requirement, and business reliance issue. But here's the key point. Most SMEs already have pieces of the strategy and their strategy in place. In fact, what we've observed is that 82% of the companies in our assessment program are in fact SMEs. So our knowledge of SMEs and sustainability should be quite developed. Therefore, this session is not about starting from zero. It's about sharing how companies can build on what they already do. A structured approach to developing a robust sustainability strategy delivers measurable benefits. It not only mitigates downside risk, but identifies upside opportunities and thus positively impact the financial performance of companies, as we learned earlier as well. Now, how can we strengthen your supply chain resilience? So when we work with SMEs, we consistently see strong sustainability foundations that are already in place. A main strength includes management oversight. As we have heard, most SMEs founders are still very much part of the day-to-day operations of companies. And there's good internal communication that we also observe. Smaller teams often have easier and more frequent communication, and health and safety is mainly a priority. And this is also driven by legal compliance. And as a consequence, there are gaps which do exist and that we do identify. For example, they include a lack of formal assessment processes, which we believe are critical when considering your sustainability strategy and materiality. A lack of structured supplier management is yet another. And we know that beyond tier one, suppliers are a higher risk. So it is important that you know your supply chain. More serious labor standards and environmental risks occur further down the supply chain, and a lack of monitoring and training systems, these systems, when in place, provide insights which enable you to enhance and adapt your sustainability strategy, which in turn helps increase its relevance and its positive impact. Now, the opportunity for many is to move from informal practices to more structured systems, and that's a really key point to note. These structured systems help support consistent performance and predictable outcomes. We simplify sustainability into 5 practical steps, which you can see on the right side in the SME chart. Which you can use to start with. And remember, you don't need to do everything at once. Think of these steps as building blocks, which with each one strengthening your system and your confidence. So step 1, define your scope and priorities. Key to this is to balance the impact, the risk and practicality. With step 2, you look at identifying key risks and stakeholders. So think about what and where are your biggest risks? Which operations or suppliers matter most? Who are your key stakeholders and what are their needs? Start simple by mapping risks in a really powerful exercise. It helps achieve focus and gain alignment within a company. And step 3, collect and assess data. This does not need to be overcomplicated. Start with what you have and think about the gaps that exist and how to address them. Data from, let's say, procurement colleagues, for example, will help you map your supply chain. Then industry level data that may be available from trade associations, global risk indices from organizations like the UN, the ILO, etc. All of these are available tools to you and help you start to inform and develop your strategy. Step 4, you then put in place policies, you document and communicate these policies, which is a very critical point. Some key policies might include a supplier code of conduct, your health and safety rules and standards, and your requirements around labor standards. Keep them simple, clear, and relevant. And I stress again that relevance is really important, and it comes back to defining your scope and your priorities. And then for the final step, on step 5, monitoring and assessing, you then use structured questions to evaluate your systems. For example, within the ESCP assessment program, most SMEs score around 60 out of 100, meaning they have already got a solid base to build from. And sustainability is a continuous cycle. And by having a robust oversight program helps you identify these gaps. It helps you take the correct action and track the progress. And of course, it is also very important to celebrate small successes along the way. Now I wanted to look or show you how to look at how performance is measured and improved. This slide shares an example of this. These assessments, the ESCP assessments, can be internally created within your own business or managed by a third party like us. They help a company understand where you sit, again, looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, and then you can go forward with a structured path. So this looks at some questions that we might be looking at would be what you could write down and what you already do. Like, how are you already managing your day-to-day operation, but then how do we move on from this, and what can we structure, or what can we move towards a more structured path? For example, this automatically, by going into a more structured path, moves you higher up in the maturity level. So going from a more reactive to a more defined level. For the next slide, I wanted to showcase a small example of a company that we worked with. So ESP Color is a case study example for someone who's undergone our assessment. So they had to deliver some information through a third-party assessment like ESCP. And from our materials and tools, ESP Color had a chance to showcase how they have improved their internal systems. One example of this would be to help prevent and mitigate human rights and environmental risks in their supply chain as part of their own values or regulatory requirements. Regarding the assessment process that they went through, they've developed a few things. So they've updated their policies, their staff handbook, which then enabled them to provide consistent and predictable outcomes from these improvements to their policies. They also introduced a new health monitoring system, which is really important in this sector to help mitigate long-term financial and legal liability risks from workplace things like illnesses, for example. And in addition, they strengthened their monitoring and insight reporting approach to help inform their strategy in the future. And what they did is they turned existing practices into more structured systems. The outcome was that they could evidence their ethical and sustainable credentials with confidence. And again, this is really important to stress, as it helps to avoid allegations or indeed sanctions for misleading ESG claims and statements. Right, so on my next slide, I wanted to quickly highlight how an assessment process works in practice. So typically we see 4 main phases: a setup or registration, followed by an evaluation, actioning any suggested items, and then going through a reassessment cycle to see how they filled the gaps. And there's some detail on this slide, which you can access after the presentation again. So you can go through this in a bit more detail or think about it in your own time. Typically, assessments are repeated on a regular process. We would normally see this done every 12 months. And importantly, the assessment is shared in the form of a report, which is tailored specifically to your company and your operations as an SME in particular. And you can then share this with your customers or with a regulatory body as a way to evidence and communicate what you're doing around sustainability. When we look at ESP, for example, our assessments are remote, which means they are also scalable. They're also low cost and globally available. There's also the benefit that they are independently verified, and further support is also provided by providing final improvements and also training. Right, so some final comments. So I'd like to leave you with 3 key messages, really. Companies are probably further ahead than they fear, so be confident around your performance, Focus on progress, not perfection. And remember, small steps create momentum. So thank you very much for your time. And please do get in touch directly if you wish to discuss anything further or learn more about how SMEs can start, or if you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tim, for really showing how that works in practice. There is actually already a question in the Q&A regarding supply chains that I think you might have some insights in. So I'll direct you towards that to look at. And just a reminder, everyone, you have these slides also on our website. So you can go to their website, ethicalsupplychain.org. And you have Tim's email as well as the CEO Carmel's email as well. So you can email the two of them with any questions you have. Thanks so much, Tim. We really appreciate your organization's participation in our workshop. Great. So that brings us as a wrap up to this particular module back to our checklist. So just as a reminder, in our model guidance, we have 4 key areas we suggest you work on. Identify your most important issues, develop a plan for managing these issues, and you can use the resources that Tim just shared to do that. Assign responsibilities, thinking about the people in your organization, and take action. Now, remember, we want to follow and monitor that action as Tim was suggesting. So make sure that that's part of your plan. Now, with that, that brings us to our final module. So well done, everyone, for getting this far. And I'm going to pass you to Fiona to start us off on our last module today.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. So we're moving in now to communicate. So here we're thinking about how to share sustainability information with different stakeholders. And in this section, we're going to focus on 2 key things. So we'll think about progression firstly. So that's thinking about how we measure and report progress over time. And separately, we're going to talk about the data mix. So thinking about how you can combine qualitative and quantitative information and maybe what's the right approach to balancing those 2 areas. So starting off firstly by thinking about the different forms that sustainability communication can take. It could include internal reporting, maybe to your management or the owners of the business. It might include kind of reactive provision of information on demand to particular requests that you receive. Or it could also include more proactive external public communications to your stakeholders as well. And so for SMEs, as ever, the key here is a proportional approach. This doesn't need to be complex or costly. Often it's really just about making key information accessible and consistent and thinking about what's the highest priority here rather than necessarily producing huge reports or collecting lots of data as well. So let's just remind ourselves briefly on why we might want to communicate this information and what benefits that we could get from this. So firstly, it will help to give recipients of the information a better understanding of the risks and opportunities faced by the business. And of course, the exercise of preparing that information is likely to help you within your organization understand those risks, impacts, and opportunities better as well. It can also support enhanced reputation, so helping to show how you're managing those risks, helping to see for your clients and stakeholders how you're proactively taking advantage of opportunities and implementing responsible business practices. Aligned to that, it can support strengthening relationships. So making sure that your stakeholders and your suppliers and your clients get the right information from you can help them to see you as a trusted partner in a broader sense as well. And finally, as we've also talked about, it can help to align your operations with your strategy. So as we already talked about in that final kind of exercise that we worked through in the last unit, thinking about kind of how to align between strategy and operations internally can then in turn lead to doing the same thing in your communications, which helps you to put together those pieces of the jigsaw about how your vision and your mission can incorporate sustainability. So really communication isn't just about compliance or box ticking, but hopefully a tool to support better decision making and stronger business relationships. So when we're thinking about what we should disclose and to who we should provide that information, a key principle here is that you need to share enough strategic detail to inspire confidence and ensure alignment whilst protecting that information that could potentially be considered commercially sensitive. And so this is where the level of detail that you provide will also need to be tailored to your audience. What you might put on your public website isn't necessarily the same as what you might send directly to a client. And in turn, what you would share with an investor might not necessarily be the same as what you would share with the client. Of course, we want to be consistent in what we're saying, but about the types of information and the level of detail, that's where things could vary. So let's go back to our company examples again and see how this could work in practice. So if we start with Green Stitch, as a reminder, they're focusing on being a high quality and sustainable garments maker. And so their website is going to be an important place to provide a first signal to potential clients that those practices that they're implementing really match that top line promise. And so what would that look like in practice? Well, we would expect on their website that they would publish their sourcing and their environmental policies. They might want to also highlight any particular external certifications or green product labels that they've achieved. And within their mission and their vision statement, they could provide a brief explanation of what their strategy is in relation to sustainability and how they're trying to achieve it. So nothing too complex, but enough for a client who's doing due diligence to feel confident that overall they're dealing with a responsible supplier and that they're feeding through that high level objective on sustainability into their particular practices and their approach. If we turn to the website of Logiflow, they might be telling a different story here to a somewhat different audience. So we know that their clients care in particular about stable costs and a reliable service. So Logiflow is going to want to focus on demonstrating that they're really prepared for the future to maintain that stability and reliability. So here they might want to specifically highlight how they're responding to fuel regulations and how they're transitioning to more sustainable fuel sources. So to help them do this, they would consider perhaps publishing their fleet management strategy, maybe some high-level emissions reporting, showing the progress they're making to reduce their emissions, and again, perhaps highlighting any green logistics certifications that they've achieved. So the message that they're aiming to convey here is that they're on top of this. And as a client, you're not going to be hit by unexpected cost increases because Logiflow weren't managing those. So it's the same channel, of course, their website, but a completely different focus to Green Stitch because the audience and that strategic positioning that they've developed are a bit different. So now let's think about internal communications as well. So Green Stitch has recognized that actually this focus on sustainability could be a real motivator for their 80 employees as well, because people want to feel proud of where they work. But then there's a practical need as well to get that information across to staff. So they need to help them to understand the new policies that they've implemented and to integrate the right actions into their day-to-day jobs to make those changes. And so here, their internal communications will focus on providing training around the environmental management practices that they've implemented. They may also consider using existing health and safety briefings to staff to echo those messages and providing regular updates on this either through emails to office-based staff or perhaps using notices or bulletin boards for those staff who are working on the factory kind of floor as well. And again, we're not aiming here to develop something large that's going to require a dedicated communications team to manage, but just keep people informed and engage them in a way that's proportionate to the role that they need to play and overall how big of a business this is as well, of course. So let's think about how Logiflow might take a different approach internally, because by contrast, they're a slightly larger organization and they do have investors and a board to report to. And so they need to think as well about how they convey the right information to their board about the risks and opportunities that they've assessed. So when they were looking to report their greenhouse gas emissions and to their clients, this has helped to surface a number of risks and opportunities that they feel it's important that they present at a board level and don't just file away in some report. And so to do this, they develop a board presentation covering 4 key things. So they highlight the client demand that they're seeing for emissions data and the fact that they're expecting to see an increase in future demands. They also identify some of the incoming regulatory requirements in the market that they're operating in, which might increase the requirements on them to improve their fuel efficiency. They'll then also mention some of the risks that they face relating to fuel cost uncertainties and the possible opportunities that they have to increase the number of electric vehicles that they're using. And finally, as well, some of the options that they could consider for green certification schemes they could seek to obtain, or possibly even opportunities for green financing. Maybe there are incentive schemes they could capitalize on to help them invest in that electrification of their vehicles. And so this is really an example of that sustainability information being used exactly as it should be. So they haven't just reported it to a client, or they haven't just conducted an assessment and left it on the shelf. They've really helped to ensure that it's informing strategic decisions at the highest level of business by presenting it in a concise way to their board. Okay, so wrapping this up, we then want to think about how to determine if issues are material. So we've talked already in our implement section about how to prioritize issues. And when we're talking about public disclosure specifically, whether that's a report, a website, or a structured disclosure, there is an important concept here that you might need to think about in your reporting, which we'll just mention briefly. And this is called materiality. And there are 2 particular materiality lenses that you can apply. So materiality really just is getting to the heart of understanding what is important and relevant for your organization. The first lens here is financial materiality, and this asks about what sustainability issues could affect the company itself. So that might be risks to revenue, costs, access to financing, etc. And so this is the lens that we see used in those ISSB standards developed by the IFRS Foundation for Investors. The second perspective here is impact materiality. So this is asking what impact the company itself has on the outside world. So its impact on people, on communities, on the economy, and on the environment. This is the lens that we see used in GRI reporting standards. And then finally, there's double materiality, and this considers both of those 2 perspectives simultaneously. And this is the approach being used in the European standards that a lot of large businesses are reporting to. And so we know for smaller businesses, it can feel like quite a lot. But really, what's just important to know here is that there are different lenses. And it might be that a company who is asking for information from you has a particular materiality lens. So it could be worth asking that company what lens that is that they want to know about, or just being prepared for the fact that you might need to report under these different perspectives. So thinking about who you're reporting to and which lens it is they want to see. And this just brings us to a final point to highlight as we round off this section, which is some useful guidance here, which has been developed for SMEs on sustainability reporting. This guidance has been developed by EFRAG, which is the European body that developed standards, the European reporting standards. But the really valuable part of this guidance is that it's designed to be used by SMEs to enable them to be ready for and respond to data requests from large companies, particularly those companies who are in scope of European reporting requirements. So if you're not in Europe or you don't have European clients, it may still be worth having a look at this because the guidance has been particularly tailored to that size and capacity of SMEs, and it provides a number of tools alongside the guidance to help you on specific disclosure topics. So, for example, particular tools on emissions reporting. So you can find that link in the slide presentation to have a little bit of a look at this guidance. And as well in the slide handout here, we've got a few extra slides with some extra tips to think about for communication. But to wrap us up, I'll hand us back to Tiffany now for the last part of the session.
Great. Thanks, Fiona. Let's wrap up with an activity. And for that, I'd ask everyone to go back to the Mentimeter. So just go back to whatever window you had Mentimeter open in last. And we'll share our screen here. And here we want you to think about how you could respond to a request that needs data very quickly. So if you were, for example, a large listed company that you supply to all of a sudden asks you for this information, and they say they want you to provide it in 30 days. Would you be able to do that? So you can use the slider, use 0 for no and 1 for yes. So would you be ready to provide information on GHG scope 1 and 2 emissions? Is that data ready to share? Would you know how to collect it very quickly? What about how your operations impact nature? Have you done this assessment? Would you know where to start, what resources to use? What about the percentage of women in each operating level of your organization? So we've had a few of you, we're getting close to 20 of you responding, but we have nearly 100 online. So let's see if a few more of you can share what you think. Now, it's good to see varying levels here. We hope to work with your market to continue to enhance your understanding on all these topics. At the SSE, we do have training on nature, on gender equality, and various areas of climate. So we hope to come back to your market with these other training possibilities to help you through that. It looks like the least understanding currently is on nature, which is a new topic that people are getting their head around. But it is very important. You would be very shocked at how much of markets are dependent on or impacting nature. So that's definitely one to build your expertise on. I think the important thing to note here is that it's not that everyone can say yes to all of these things, because 30 days actually isn't that long. Sometimes these requests might come in and you might not need to have all this information publicly available, but you need to be advanced enough to be able to reply to these. So what do you think would happen if you could not answer? And I think maybe, Fiona, we could go to the next mentee. Yeah, what do you think happens if you cannot provide this information when asked to do so? Give you a second to think about that and share your thoughts. Non-compliance, so you simply don't send the information. But then what the company that has asked you for, yeah, the next person said lose the contract. If someone has asked you for information and you cannot provide it, it is possible you lose that contract. Fines, well, that depends if it's required or not from a regulatory perspective, but maybe the company asking for it would get a fine if they can't provide this information, or there'd be some sort of repercussion. So then the knock-on effect might come to you, and that they no longer want to use you as a supplier. Improper disclosure, uncertainty of strategy. Yeah, it also changes the risk associated with you. Maybe it's an investor asking for this information. Maybe it's a client or someone in your supply chain asking for this information. But it means that if you can't access that information, maybe you become a little bit more risky, and they have to decide whether they're willing to take that risk or not. So really good answers there, everyone. We'll move to our last question now, because I think you all understood that one really well. You might be familiar with this question. We asked it at the very start. You were all around an average of 6 at the start. So it'd be good to see, how comfortable are you now? Do you feel like you have the resources and the understanding to take those first steps? Do you know where to go to find the information you need to be able to identify those risks and opportunities for sustainability? How comfortable are you now? And it's good to see that of those that have answered so far, you do feel a fair bit more comfortable with this topic, which is great. We are going to wrap up this session with a number of additional resources. So hopefully that makes you feel even more comfortable with this topic. And as a reminder, you can actually access this training online. We're recording it and we'll put it on the website. So you will be able to access all of this again if you need a reminder. Now, that brings us to a closing message for this module, and that is that transparency is not about having perfect data. It's about being ready and able to respond to evolving requirements and expectations. We can remember that, for example, Green Stitch couldn't provide a full emissions audit, but they provided an honest first measurement and a clear plan. Logiflow couldn't yet respond to scope 3, but they can provide scope 1 and 2. They can provide a timeline. They can demonstrate that someone is accountable. Great to see all the applause. So hopefully those messages sunk in. As a reminder for this chapter of the actions on the checklist, make sure to measure and report on progress over time and make sure to use a mix of both qualitative and quantitative information. Now let's leave you with a number of key resources you can make use of in your training or in your action after this training. The first is the checklist that we've been using. So that's in the SSE's model guidance. This is a document that underpins much of what we were talking about today. It includes a practical checklist, so think of that as your starting point from today's lessons and learnings and turning those into actions. You can access that in the chat and in your slide deck. Also, we recommend making use of the IFC Sustainability Assessment and Improvement Tool. This is designed specifically for mid-sized growth companies. It's an Excel-based instrument with a user guide, and it helps you systematically assess where your business currently stands on sustainability across all key areas: strategy, governance, risk management, operations, and communication. And it then helps you to identify priority actions and to track your progress over time. So that's also available in the chat and in your handout. And another really important resource from IFC is their Beyond the Balance Sheet platform. This is a one-stop shop for sustainability and climate disclosure guidance, particularly designed for companies in emerging markets. It includes tools, e-learning resource, and a self-assessment platform. So if you want to go deeper into any of the topics we've discussed today, particularly around disclosure and reporting, this is an excellent next step. Again, link is available in the chat. Now let's get to what you're all really interested in, and that's the certificate. So congratulations, everyone. You did really well. We had a lot of great questions, great participation, and you all stuck through to the end of the course. So we would love to reward you with a certificate. It is CPD certified. You just have to fill in the feedback survey that we've just shared in the chat. Do not worry if you miss this in the chat. You will get an email from Zoom. So everyone who participated today will get an email from Zoom tomorrow, about 24 hours after the workshop ends, with the link to the feedback survey as well. Now, it is a Google survey. So if you have trouble accessing it, you might have to use a personal computer. And if you do not see the certificate in about a week's time after filling in the feedback survey, check your spam folder or maybe see if your work email might have blocked the certificate. Great. So before we close, a few thank yous. Thank yous to our official supporters. Official supporters make all of our work possible by providing a small voluntary contribution to the SSE. If you'd like to show your commitment to sustainability by becoming an SSE official supporter, please just reach out to us, info@sseinitiative.org. And a thank you to our hosts, the Royal Securities Exchange of Bhutan, and all of those that made the training possible today. Thanks UNDP for joining us today. Thanks to Ethical Supply Chain Program for providing that in-person experience, and IFC and the Swiss government for making this workshop possible. We hope you all have a lovely day and good luck on your sustainability journey. Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks, everyone, Fiona and everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you all. It was a
Thanks,
very
La, thanks.
Thank you, Tiffany, Fiona, and Vincenzo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
La
everyone.
Sadochisa, thank you so
Take
much,
care.
La.
We look forward to the next little higher intermediate session as we prepare ourselves for the full disclosure, adopting full disclosure standards in the coming
Wonderful.
few months. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Tiffany. Hello, Tiffany. Hello, Tiffany.
Hi, Richin.
Yeah, we said that. Sorry, give me 2 minutes. We said that we'll have a short discussion after this session. So
Yeah, Richin,
I don't
I'll
know.
email you because our session's still live. So we're going to close out the session, say goodbye to everyone, and then
Yeah.
I'll send you an email and set up a call.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Tiffany.
Bye,
Yeah, that's
everyone.
great.